Hello, my name is Eugenia and today I'm going to tell you how to create atmospheric illustration. When you start working on an illustration, it's a good idea to begin with thumbnails. These loose little sketches are great for helping you see what idea will work best and what composition will best convey the feeling you're looking for. At this stage, it's a good practice not to get hung up on drawing one specific idea, but to try as many different approaches as possible, one of which will probably be what you need. The story about pensive character, emphasized by the ornate and filled composition of option 1, makes this sketch the most interesting and promising for further work. Since the thumbnail was very rough, at this stage it is necessary to clarify and harmonize the composition inside the sheet. The downward displacement of a character and the branches arranged by the frame around him enhance the feeling of his thoughtfulness and isolation, which adds more thematic depth to the illustration. The next step is grayscale. Already at this stage of work, through correctly constructed tonal relationships, the illustration begins to acquire atmosphere and mood. Light branches echoing the luminous character and contrasting with the surrounding darkness create a mysterious and slightly magical atmosphere that perfectly complements the idea of thoughtfulness and isolation set by the composition. It is also worth paying attention to the composition at this stage and checking it with the composition grid to ensure that the guides and focal point are in the right places. Once the basic values have been built and the composition has been corrected, you can move on to finalizing the contrasts. Since the character is the focal point of the illustration, he should be the most contrasting object on the sheet. As you move away from the focal point, the contrast should become softer. Along with refining the contrasts, to enhance the atmosphere of illustration, some key details can be outlined for thorough painting. For example, water and stars. These are key to giving the illustration a mystical atmosphere. After completing the grayscale, you can move on to color. To make it easier to start working on it, you should find from 3 to 5 references, what will become a reliable support for further work on the illustration. For this illustration, the paintings Night Brings Good Counsel and Silent Night by Eric Bowman and Blue by Miniam were excellent help. The atmosphere, color and light of these paintings perfectly resonate with both the idea and the finished grayscale. It will be easier to start working with color if you first set a base color using a gradient map. This allows you to immediately put into the illustration several basic shades that will be easier to work with in the future. The gradient map created here uses dark blue for the shadows, lilac for the midtones, and pink for the highlights. We continue working with color on a new layer on top of the base color layer. This way we will still have the opportunity to roll back a few steps and try the colors. We distribute color spots keeping in mind the hierarchy of values and contrast distribution within the illustration. You shouldn't get too hung up on the previously defined grayscale of the illustration at this stage. If you want to change some aspect of the illustration for the sake of a better representation of the idea, just do it. To ensure that your work is focused, you need to clearly understand what purpose each reference serves. Thus, Silent Night is a main reference for color and light. Blue is a great example of graphics. Night Brings Good Counsel a reference of a main mood. It is easiest to stick to more neutral colors at this stage, so that you have room to add pops of color at a later stage. But of course, you can immediately experiment with more saturated colors if the idea of the illustration requires it. Before finalizing the illustration, make sure that the illustration is made in layers or divided into layers that will be convenient to work with. This will allow you to make changes more freely to different plans of the image without fear of spoiling the finished and successful moments. The most optimal way is to divide the illustration into the foreground, middle ground, and background, as well as to separate small and complex details onto separate layers. For example, tree leaves in the foreground or stars in the background. At this stage, it's also worth enhancing the sense of space. Since this illustration tends more towards graphics than painting, the aerial perspective used here is not so strongly expressed, and space acquires depth primarily due to scale and guides. Since the foreground already looks quite final, the next step is to work on the middle ground and background. To do this, we need to work out the forms better and add more medium and small details. It is important to always remember that the farther the object is from the viewer and the less significant, the more general its detailing should be. Most of the illustration is ready, but its magical atmosphere can still be enhanced by adding color essence. Along with the essence, at this stage it is necessary to once again go through the entire illustration, refine all the rough edges and strengthen the focal point. Thus, the branches in the foreground were refined and more essence details appeared in the area of the focal point. After completing, the illustration will need to be post-processed. At this stage, adding overlay effects and making small changes to the values, color or textures of the illustration can make it even more interesting. In this illustration, a slight darkening vignette has been added, and the contrast of the focal point has been slightly increased. A subtle noise effect was also added on top to give more texture to the final illustration. Now that we have completed all these steps, we have a final illustration with a mystical and thoughtful atmosphere. I hope you found this workshop useful. Thank you for your attention. Keep drawing, and see you again!